I was rinsing my dinner plate when my son's voice bled through a pocket-dialed call. Calm, efficient, merciless. Move him into care, sell the house, and we're set. In that instant, 42 years of sacrifice collapsed into a transaction. The man who once balanced my toddler bike now weighed my life in market value. I didn't shout, I didn't break, I picked up a pen, found a lawyer, and let signatures do what love alone no longer could. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The porch knows my weight and my habits the way a faithful usher knows who slips in late on Sunday. I sanded these boards myself and fed them linseed oil until the pine took on a slow shine, the color of tea left to steep. When humidity lifts off the marsh, the wood exhales. Out past the live oaks, the Ashley River moves with a patience that makes clocks look foolish. The fan above me ticks, the screen door whispers on its spring. Martha's picture sits just inside, beside the old AM radio. In it, she's wearing the red scarf she tied on every time we painted eaves, a look that said I was brave but also a little reckless. The radio still pulls a soul station from somewhere upstate. The DJ dedicates a song each night to anybody holding on the long way. I pour mint tea from a sweating jar left by Mrs. Parker and leave the glass on a coaster Martha crocheted during her chemo years. I never set it on the rail. My days run like a clean chalk line. Scripture before sunrise, a whispered prayer to keep my voice limber, a slow walk along the fence to test rails and latches. I record what needs attention in a narrow ledger: hinge, south gate, caulk, window over sink, oil, planer. Lunch is red beans and rice if I planned well, or a piece of fish if the market had anything worth buying. 4 o'clock is dusting, not because dust minds waiting, but because routine is a promise I can still keep. Saturdays I fish at James Island with Pastor John, say little, and come home with enough quiet to last 2 days. The house wears its history openly. Under the north window, the subfloor changes species. I know where the old heart pine ends and my patch begins. In the study, my father's workbench still smells of turpentine and sun. The knife scars along the edge are his. After a storm, I replace the rafters, chalking lines the way the shipyard taught me. When wood is fitted right, it goes quiet. That kind of silence is the only compliment I trust. My son speaks a quicker language. Eric calls this house trapped equity and outlines how a property can be leveraged into the next thing, then the next. His watch flares when he gestures. Nicole, his partner, works in PR and sees stories everywhere, especially in rooms with good light. She once called the porch aesthetic, a word that felt like someone reserving a seat I was already sitting in. I smiled. Polite is the best shield against a battle nobody can win. I don't begrudge them their speed. Every generation hears a different metronome, but memory sets at a slower tempo. Martha used to shell peas on the top step while I planed a board, and when the blades sang, she would say, "You hear that?" The wood's talking back, I told her. Wood answers to skill and patience. She said it answered to respect. Both of us were right. Craft is a conversation, and dignity is knowing when to speak and when to listen. Eric has floated a luxury senior community with medical support, piecing the phrase together like a quilt he hoped I would accept. "It'd be safer," he said once. "You'd have people around." I answered, "I do have people around." It ended there. I know safety is his name for control. Independence is the last sturdy chair I own. I am not giving it to someone who admires it mostly for resale. In the study, a fireproof box holds the deed and a few other papers that matter. I do not open it often. The key hangs on a nail behind the doorframe, the same hiding place my father liked in 1959. Beside the box sits Martha's fountain pen, black with a gold clip. Sometimes I trace the clip and feel the small ridge where her thumbnail wore the finish down. A ledger hangs on the wall where I note each repair, the date, the weather, the fix. Dusk stitches itself together with cicadas. The porch fan keeps time like a tired drummer. River light thins to pewter. I lower the radio and tilt Martha's picture to catch less glare. In the glass, I see myself beside her, a man still here and a boy still asking what to do about a loose board that refuses to settle. There is a difference between being alone and being managed. Sometimes I think of leaving, not out of fear but curiosity. What would it be to sleep where palmettos don't knock the siding in storms, where air smells of anything but salt? The thought passes. This house is not a museum and not a cage. It is a testament to hands that still finish what they start. Night walks in from the yard inch by inch and sits with me until the fan winds down. I tell myself, as I have every evening this year, that any move I make will be mine to make and on my terms. I will choose the hour, the route, and the key. The porch fan wound down to a soft click when my phone buzzed against the side table. I expected a weather alert or Mrs. Parker's evening recipe swap. Instead, the family thread flashed a blue link from Eric, the subject line clipped, Propco Internal Quarterly. It didn't fit our usual exchange of birthday photos and reminders about the fish fry at New Hope. The preview showed a thumbnail wave of faces on a grid and a red dot pulsing in the corner. Auto-recorded Zoom with open mics. Courtesy told me to ignore it. The address line told me I was a recipient. Curiosity lifted its head. I wiped the condensation ring my tea had left and tapped play. Laptop fan up, radio down, I watched the bar crawl across the bottom of the screen. Eric's voice came first, brisk, warm like a salesman's foyer, followed by Nicole's smoother cadence. A third teammate chimed in with the clipped humor of someone who thinks every problem has a growth hack. They spoke a language that polished corners for speed. Luxury senior community with nurse staff, Nicole cooed, connecting care to optics. Eric followed with list as estate condition, cash-ready investor, off-market narrative, move fast before sentiment shifts. I heard my life described like a product sheet. Then the red flag raised itself without help. The teammate asked if POA had been lined up just in case. If he isn't up for signatures, we can guide a durable power, he said, casual as a grocery list. Paper is shortcut, paper is pry bar. Under my thumb, the phone warmed. Inside my chest, something cold drew a neat border I hadn't drawn in years. I didn't pause the recording or speak to an empty room. I let it play and counted my breaths the way I used to count passes with a plane. Outside, cicadas thinned one by one. In the kitchen, a single drop crept from the sweating glass along the coaster Martha crocheted and reached the table's edge like a runner breaking tape. 42 years of "We've got you, Dad" collapsed into inventory. The words did what words do when they're pointed. They landed exactly where they were aimed. I stood and felt the house notice. Floorboards remembered my weight and gave back the small, friendly noise that says a footing holds. The study door swung open on hinges I'd oiled in May. My hand went to the right spot without hunting, the nail behind the door frame where the key has lived since 1959. The fireproof box rasped once as it slid forward. The lock accepted the key on the first try. Paper has its own gravity. The deed rose from the envelope with the authority of a board you already milled true. Under the desk lamp, I traced the title line with a finger until my hand steadied. Recorded 2011, mortgage satisfied, no encumbrances, grantor and grantee, both me. I read it again slower, the way you read a verse you mean to live. No co-owner, no addendum, no durable power attached to anything with my name. A rough draft will from years back lay beneath, never finalized because grief had a way of pushing paperwork into later. Martha's black fountain pen rested beside it, gold clip worn thin where her thumbnail used to worry it during long phone calls with insurance. I set the pen parallel to the envelope like aligning tools on a bench. Order breeds breath. The recording ended on a schedule slide and a promise to sync offline. I closed the file and the room grew large and still. Somewhere downriver, a horn bled through the air and folded into the dark. I picked up Martha's pen but didn't uncap it. Another note waited in the deed envelope, a sticky with a name I'd nearly forgotten, Lauren Chin, Meeting Street, and a direct number. Years ago, after the funeral, a woman at church had handed it to me and said, "Write down the person who knows how to say no for you when you forget how." I had tucked it away like a fire escape I hoped never to find. I set Lauren's note next to the pen and opened my pocket notebook. The page smelled faintly of sawdust from the last time I'd written on the porch. I printed 3 lines with the block letters I use when accuracy matters. Call Lauren Chin at 8:15. Bring deed, draft will, ID. Ask about medical proxy, not financial. The pencil left a ridge where I pressed too hard. The ridge helped. I did not call Pastor John. I did not call Mrs. Parker for comfort disguised as pie. I did not call Eric to argue with a recording that didn't need a rebuttal. Arguments live on air, outcomes live on paper. I turned the radio off and let the absence of music reveal the room's own tone. The lamp's circle held steady over the deed, the pen, the note. I placed the deed back in the envelope and the envelope back in the box. Originals belonged where fire and water would have to work to touch them. Copies could be brave later. Before bed, I walked the perimeter of the house the way a man checks a fence after a hard wind. Thumb on window latches, palm on door rails. A pause at the porch to listen for the subtle complaint that means wood wants oil. The fan ticked once and stopped. In the bedroom, I set the phone face down and slid the pocket notebook onto the nightstand. Tomorrow, I said aloud, a single word to an empty room that had witnessed enough promises to know which ones count. The house eased around me like the frame of a chair you've repaired correctly. No wobble, no squeak, only intention taking shape. Sleep came late and level. When it lifted, gray washed the ceiling, and the first goal drew a ragged line across the quiet. I laid out the deed, my license, the draft will, and Martha's pen as deliberately as I would lay out chisels before a delicate cut. I put Lauren's sticky in my shirt pocket and pressed it flat. 8:15 was not a cliff. It was a door. I rinsed the tea glass until the ring disappeared, wiped the table dry, and left the house as if it were an elder I respected. Lights off, locks checked, tools aligned for the morning. Morning came in a rinse of pewter light over Meeting Street, the kind that makes brick look honest. I placed the deed, my license, Martha's fountain pen, and the pocket notebook in a brown envelope and drove in before traffic turned testy. The law office smelled faintly of toner and lemon oil. Files sat squared to the desk edges. A kettle clicked off somewhere behind a glass wall, promising order and caffeine in equal measure. Lauren Chin met me with the steady face of someone who has seen family storms and outweighted them. She took my license, read the address aloud, checked the date, and asked simple orientation questions I answered without effort. She slid a red folder across the desk stamped Lawson, real property, then fed the deed through a scanner in crisp words, each page flattening under a pane and returning as digital certainty. My hands loosened around the pen. We read the 2011 recording line together, my finger pacing hers. Sole ownership, mortgage satisfied, no encumbrances, no co-signer. She explained the tidy difference between a medical proxy and a durable power of attorney, between independent living and assisted living, between care and control. I listened the way you listen to a new tool's motor, for the pitch that means business. The words settled into place like tenons seated square. She laid out 3 tracks on a legal pad. First, estate hygiene. Refresh the will. Name Pastor John as healthcare agent only, no financial POA for anyone. Second, personal boundaries, a notice template for unwanted pressure, a short script if calls turn theatrical. Third, property options, If I chose to sell, do it under my rules. Quiet buyer, cash, short contingencies, possession after closing. You decide the tempo, she said, tapping the pad once. I nodded and felt my lungs find a longer reach. I told her what mattered. No public listing, cash-ready buyer, inspections limited to termites, electrical, plumbing, 45 days occupancy after close if I wanted it, no concessions, no storytelling beyond the lawful minimum. She suggested Ben Harper, a quiet agent who placed houses with preservation funds. Everything in writing, she said, everything through her office. I agreed. Paper leaves a cleaner trail than voices do. With my consent, she dialed Ben on speaker. Her description was clinical. 1928 craftsman, owner restored, West Ashley, maintenance exemplary, privacy essential. Ben answered like a man who had already driven past the porch in his mind. Heritage Porch Fund, he said, bought porches for the sake of porches. They paid cash and closed inside 2 weeks. They honored occupancy clauses. We set a preliminary walkthrough for tomorrow at 3. Lauren would draft terms before the first handshakes. Then she built me shields, a simple will framework with blanks where values would sit, a medical proxy naming Pastor John, a one-page declaration stating no durable power of attorney existed and none would be considered without counsel present. Escrow instructions with my preferences marked in tidy lines. She advised freezing my credit, flagging my bank for no third-party inquiries, documenting all interactions, and storing originals off-site. These were not weapons so much as braces in a frame. Houses stand because frames do. I signed a privacy acknowledgement. The kettle's promise arrived in a ceramic mug. Lauren's paralegal scanned my old draft will and clipped it into the red folder. I placed Martha's pen parallel to the folder's spine and watched a calm I recognized from woodshops spread across the room. You don't rush good joinery. You measure twice, then once more because you want silence when the joint takes. I was pocketing the deed when the paralegal returned too fast for ordinary news. A notary in Somerville had received an appointment request for a durable power of attorney bearing my name. The signature page arrived as a fuzzy scan. Lauren's eyes cooled but did not spark. She called the notary at once, speaker off, voice low and professional. In person, government ID, no exceptions. The scan would be rejected. A note would be placed on file. A pulse climbed my neck and then retreated as if it had met a locked door. Outside, the day had brightened into hard edges. I drove the bridge back toward West Ashley, rehearsing the 3 tracks aloud like a carpenter counting passes with a plane. Will first, boundary script ready, property path set. The river below lifted and flattened under wind, pewter going quicksilver. By habit, I stopped at Palmetto Trust and scheduled a private banking intake, asking the clerk to note no third-party inquiries and to require in-branch identification for any changes. Her keystrokes made a small, satisfying rhythm. At home, I wrote the date in my maintenance ledger and the kind of summary I wish every job site kept. Counsel retained, deed verified, buyer path identified, POA attempt stopped. The fireproof box took the deed back without complaint. I set photocopies in the old safe as a decoy and laid Lauren's card beside Martha's pen on the desk. The two looked right together, authority and memory, ink and gold, side by side, without crowding. I stepped onto the porch with an oil rag and ran a thin sheen along the top rail until the cloth came away almost clean. Small finishes keep a man honest. The fan above me ticked in time with my breathing. Somewhere, a barge horn laid a line under the afternoon. I thought about speaking to Eric, about measuring my words against his speed, and decided against both. Documents would speak for me until they couldn't, and then I would. Before sundown, I called Pastor John to say I had listed him as healthcare agent on a proxy to be signed tomorrow. He answered with a blessing short enough to fit in one breath. I thanked him and ended the call with nothing left to echo. Night thinned the air, the house settled by degrees, boards easing into familiar beds. I wrote 3 words in my pocket notebook: legal, quiet, mine, and underlined the last one until the paper raised a rim. Then I closed the book like you close a door that still fits its frame. Ben Harper arrived exactly at 3 with a clipboard slim enough to disappear under his arm. He parked at the curb without angling for a perfect photo and stepped onto the porch as if it were a pew. No lawn sign, no phone held high. He touched the rail the way carpenters do, palm flat, listening for looseness. The rail answered with that quiet a good joint gives back. I stated my terms once more so there would be no romance later. Off-market only, cash, inspections limited to termites, electrical, and plumbing, 45 days occupancy after close at my sole option, no concessions. Disclosures limited to what the law writes down, a privacy clause that keeps my name out of any mouth but our own for 60 days. He nodded the way a man nods when the job is already measured. Ben's buyers, he said, were the Heritage Porch Fund. They were not flippers. They preserved the part of a house the neighborhood actually sees. Shade, steps, the first conversation before a door opens. If title came back clean and inspections stayed modest, they could close inside 12 days. He did not use a single adjective he could not defend. In my world, that counts for more than enthusiasm. He took a few photos indoors, label plates, the electrical panel, the crawl space hatch, and none from the street. I watched his shoes. Work boots, not dress leather. I could live with that. Numbers came without theater. Heritage floated $615,000. Cash, earnest money wired within a day of signatures. No appraisal. Buyer to cover title insurance. Lauren would draft our agreement with the clauses we needed. Privacy, possession after closing, and an anti-harassment addendum stating that if any third party waived imaginary rights, the buyer would help send a courteous letter with a spine. I accepted in principle and asked for everything in writing before anyone breathed on a joist. Ben agreed and left as quietly as he came, promising 2 specialists for a focused look. The inspectors arrived in work trucks that smelled like sawdust and coffee. One carried a moisture meter, the other a flashlight with a lens so clean it looked pretend. They moved through rooms in their socks, spoke softly, and pointed with open hands. In the crawl space, they found a lace of powder postmarks on an old sill and recommended a preventive treatment. The electrical panel wore my labels in block letters, the breaker screws sat snug, the bonding strap glinted like it had a job. Plumbing showed no panic, only the slow confidence of copper that has decided to live. They left with more nods than notes. No repair demand followed, only a standard termite bond transfer at the buyer's cost and an inspection window of 48 hours that closed like a good door. With the house speaking for itself, I went to Palmetto Trust to lock doors you cannot see. At the desk, I scheduled a private banking intake and asked them to place a no third-party inquiry flag on my profile. Any change would require me in person with identification and a handshake. I requested a safe deposit box for originals. The clerk typed and nodded. Keystrokes ticked like a metronome. Back home, I left scans with Lauren by secure link, set photocopies in the old metal safe as a decoy, slid the deed and IDs into an envelope marked in my own shorthand and logged each step in my pocket notebook with the date, the weather, and a small box to tick once things cleared. At New Hope Baptist, I sat in Pastor John's office while late light poured through a stained glass window that remembers more hands than mine. I told him I wanted him as my healthcare agent, and only that. He placed his palm on mine and prayed a sentence so short it missed no word. Independence, he reminded me gently, is not isolation. It is the responsibility to ask help on time. I left with a copy of the proxy to sign in Lauren's office the next morning and a script he didn't know he had given me. Say what you mean once and stop. I installed a doorbell camera that evening and a small lens in the lamp base inside, angled at the entry. The purpose was documentation, not spectacle. If pressure found its way to my threshold, I wanted a record without an audience. I labeled storage bins and sorted Eric and Nicole's things into neat stacks. Startup magazines, camera equipment, a box of holiday ornaments I never cared for, a bundle of cords that fit nothing I own. Each label wore a timestamp and a short list of contents. Inventory is a kindness in a war you never declared. On Saturday, Eric drove me to a luxury senior community with floors that shone like hotel lobbies. Nicole filmed short angles of soft chairs, tea service, and flower arrangements that made every hallway look kind. I listened as a representative explained amenities and personal call buttons. I declined to sign anything and declined to hand over identification. Nicole asked casual questions about where I kept documents in case of emergency. I told her the house still needed its south hinge oiled and asked if she preferred lemon bars or chess pie for Sunday dinners she did not attend. She smiled the way PR smiles when a shot goes soft. I repeated my boundary script once. I am considering options, and any decision will be mine. Pressure rose from another corner. The Magnolia Bend HOA sent a fence violation notice with a retroactive fine for a board installed 10 years ago. The timestamp matched Nicole's weekend post too closely to be a coincidence. Lauren answered with a letter short enough to be a scalpel. The bylaws forbid retroactivity. Selective enforcement invites liability. Withdraw notice and correct the record within 3 business days. The HOA replied with a clarification that withdrew the fine. The signature at the bottom belonged to a woman who once sat 3 rows behind Nicole in high school. I filed the thread and ticked a different box. Remember who plays which instrument. Evening settled in clean. I wiped a thin film of oil along the porch rail and set Martha's pen parallel to Lauren's card, 2 lines pointing the same way. The fan clicked down to low. Somewhere a barge spoke once across the water. I told myself what the ledger already knew. I will sell on my terms, move on my terms, and let paper speak until paper is finished. The closing date was fixed. The porch, whether it liked the job or not, would soon be a witness stand. They came up the walk 3 abreast, Eric with his leather folder, Nicole with a tote bristling color tabs, and a young notary whose stamp kit clicked like a metronome against her hip. The doorbell camera caught watches, smiles, and the small choreography of intent. Heat pushed out of the marsh and laid its hand on the porch. I opened the screen and let them choose their places. Eric took the chair to my right like he owned the angle. Nicole arranged papers on the table as if setting appetizers. The notary stayed standing, bright-eyed, neutral, professional. Nicole slid a stack forward and titled it Care Paperwork, the way you call a leash a ribbon. On top sat a medical proxy form with blank lines that looked friendly. Beneath it, buried like a tick at the nape, lay a durable power of attorney with the real property box already checked. I set Martha's fountain pen parallel to the margins and said nothing. The notary explained she was here only to witness if I chose to sign. I nodded and asked to see identification for everyone at the table. Eric smirked, Nicole obliged. The notary produced her commission card in a clean sleeve. I wrote their names and numbers in my pocket notebook, ink settling into the paper like a pen finding wood. Reading gives a man time. I took it. Headers out loud, clauses silent, each page squared before the next. The porch fan ticked above us. Far off, thunder moved around as if testing walls. When I reached the page with the checked box, I rested my finger on it long enough to feel the ridge of toner. Then I closed the folder gently, turned the pen so the clip faced me, and let stillness do the talking. "This isn't happening today," I said. "Medical choices are mine. Finances too." The notary recapped her stamp. Eric's jaw twitched, a pulse he couldn't hide behind the watch. Nicole's smile hardened by a degree only cameras catch. She shifted to a softer register, talking optics and neighbors and the way the internet loves doing right by Dad. Eric tried safety and convenience, the 2 words people use when they want your keys. I repeated my boundary script the way Lauren had written it. Clear, short, not unkind, and added that I had counsel and signed nothing without her review. Eric asked if I didn't trust family. I said trust is a verb you have to conjugate every day. They stepped into the yard to give me space. The lamp camera caught their side talk, the quick consult they mistook for privacy. "He'll cave if we frame it right." Nicole said, voice thin with heat. Get the notary back on schedule, Eric answered, and then something about timing posts for late afternoon engagement. I didn't follow them with my eyes. I starred the folder like a bad board you mean to replace and waited where the porch knows my weight. My phone buzzed on the windowsill. Lauren's email sat at the top like a seal. Earnest money received, inspection cleared, closing confirmed for business day 12, possession after closing clause intact, privacy clause in force. I forwarded a copy to my cloud, backed it to an external drive, and wrote funds confirmed in the ledger with a square to tick when wires turned final. Paper makes a sound in your head when it lands right. This one did. They returned with faces arranged to look patient. Eric exhaled the kind of sigh that asks to be graded. We're just trying to help, he said. Nicole offered a compromise. Move me temporarily to a luxury community while we streamline logistics. Temporary that requires my deed isn't temporary. I told them any independent living decision would be mine, on my schedule, with my signatures and no proxies. The notary checked her watch, apologized professionally, and excused herself on account of no signatures. The doorbell camera took her departure like a witness slipping out of court. Before dinner, the air shifted. Nicole posted a long care thread on her channels, a ribbon of soft photos and gentle claims that I'd shown concerning decline. Comments stacked fast. Prayer hands, advice, strangers recommending guardianship as if it were a casserole. A burner account, new, no history, dropped a rumor about a stove incident. The tag on Magnolia Ben's page drew neighborhood eyes like moths to a porch light. I felt the old anger rise and then pass, the way a wave lifts a skiff and sets it down if you've tied your knots right. Pastor John called before I could decide my next step. He spoke in a voice built for hospital rooms and jailhouse waiting benches, calm, steady, with a little gravel that tells truth from panic. He asked if I was safe and clear. I told him to come by if he had 10 minutes. When he arrived, I poured iced tea and set the phone on the table. We watched the doorbell footage first, Eric and Nicole arriving with their script, the notary's quiet professionalism, the buried POA with its box pre-checked. We watched the lamp camera's angle next, the yard whispering, the talk of framing, the timing of posts. Pastor John exhaled through his nose and shook his head once. He offered to speak publicly in my defense. I asked him not to. Just post that you spoke to me today, I said. Nothing more. He understood. Truth can walk on fewer words than lies. I sent Lauren 2 short emails. The first held a link to the post and a screen capture of the rumor. The second noted that the notary left unsatisfied, no signatures executed, and that pressure had gone online. Lauren replied with a template letter already sharpened. If harassment escalated, she would send a cease and desist citing privacy and interference with a pending real property transaction. She recommended moving originals to the bank box tonight. I placed the deed, IDs, and updated drafts in an envelope and drove to Palmetto Trust's after-hours box. The lobby lights hummed like fluorescent bees. Back home, I set decoy photocopies in the old safe and checked the door once and then again. Night gathered in the rafters and settled on the porch like a second roof. The radio stayed off. Thunder rolled along the offshore line, content to flex without landing. I put Martha's pen back in its groove on the desk and slid Lauren's card beneath it, ink resting on name, name resting on wood. In the pocket notebook, I wrote 5 words and underlined them once. I will not be narrated. The fan ticked like a quiet clock. The house breathed the way houses breathe when the joinery is sound and the weather can huff without getting in. Tomorrow would not need a speech, it would need a signature, a key, and a back that remembers how to sit straight when people watch. The conference room on Meeting Street looked planed and square, edges true, glass so clean it turned reflections into drawings. Settlement documents were stacked with corners aligned, a pin placed at 12 o'clock on the pad as if the day itself had been centered. The escrow officer verified my license and recited my address, each syllable an inventory of what was mine to confirm. We reviewed the settlement statement, taxes prorated, recording fees listed, association dues zeroed. Earnest money sat posted in a line that might as well have been a rivet. Wire instructions were read aloud once and again, numbers matched to numbers, names to names. I signed the deed, the seller's affidavit, the tax forms that make official what Wood and Sweat already said. Heritage Porch Fund countersigned in tidy strokes. Funded, the officer announced, and the word landed the way a joist lands onto beam. Wait, meeting welcome. Relief rose, but did not spill. It was the kind you feel after surfacing from a long dive and discovering you still know how to breathe. Lauren recapped the clauses we had carved into place. 45 days possession after closing at my option. 60 days non-disclosure of the seller's identity. The anti-harassment addendum that turns courtesy into a spine. The clear distinction that any independent living decision would remain mine. I chose to exercise 30 of the 45 days, enough time to move deliberately into Low Country Oaks without turning urgency into sloppiness. She walked me through the next steps not as a script but as a frame. Route all contact through her office, refuse any home tours or content requests, store originals off-site, keep a copy set within reach. Ben Harper met me at the elevator. There was no handshake theater or photo, just the plain respect of a man acknowledging another man's work. He said Heritage would preserve the porch details and that a small plaque might come later. I gave him a nod, the kind that says nothing and everything. He confirmed the buyer's team would only step inside by schedule through Lauren, no surprises, no friendly detours, and peeled off toward the stairs like a stagehand exiting clean. On the way back across the bridge, I stopped at Palmetto Trust. The clerk checked the monitor and said the wire had landed. She confirmed the no third-party inquiry flag and the requirement that any change would happen in person. The safe deposit access registered in a time-stamped line that looked like a quiet oath. Money, I reminded myself, is a tool. It is not a verdict, not a parade. It is a way to choose without asking permission. The call came as I parked in the strip of shade near my porch steps. I answered on speaker in the empty truck cab so the air could hear I had nothing to hide. "You sold my house," Eric said. The sentence tried to occupy space it had not earned. "I sold my house," I said. "Independent living is my choice, not your project." He tried a softer angle, something about transitions and teamwork. I told him future requests would go through Lauren, that no meetings would happen without counsel, and that his belongings could be collected at the warehouse by appointment. The silence afterward felt like a room that had been overfurnished suddenly cleared. Inside, I set my leather folio on Martha's desk, slid Lauren's card beneath the groove where Martha's pen rests, and began a letter. I kept it firm and factual, not punitive. I confirmed the sale and the possession terms, enclosed the storage inventory list and the address, and explained that Pastor John is my healthcare agent for medical decisions only. I requested 6 months without social posts about family and offered one supervised conversation later if conditions were met. I sealed the original for Eric, scanned a copy to Lauren, and filed one for myself. Paper, when aligned, sounds like a drawer closing. Keys were next. Per closing protocol, I delivered the house keys to Ben, kept the garage opener under the possession clause for the brief period I remained, and noted the transfer time and initials in my pocket notebook. The doorbell camera remained armed. Originals went into the bank box. Decoy photocopies stayed in the home safe until I vacated. The ledger got a line that would read clean to any man who has ever balanced anything. Closed, funded, possession, retained. I called Low Country Oaks Independent Living and confirmed a move-in date for day 10. A corner unit with morning light would be held in my name, utilities would switch over, mail would forward. The woman on the line had a voice like clean linens and kept her promises and sentences short enough to stand on their own. I told Pastor John the date and he gave a blessing over the phone that fit inside one breath. It did not decorate the moment. It grounded it. Packing began with the objects that asked to be asked first. Martha's pen slid into a wrap of soft cloth. Our wedding photo went into its own sleeve, face turned inward to protect the glass. The model skiff Eric and I built years ago got a careful berth in a box marked fragile with the kind of letters even movers respect. Furniture would remain per the addendum. I labeled boxes with dates and rooms, tape hissed and smoothed under my palm. The house echoed less as memory gathered into edges. Nothing mourned exactly. Things simply prepared to be carried. At dusk, I stepped onto the porch and oiled the rail one more time this week. The boards answered with quiet, the kind you only get when fibers have lived together long enough to trust pressure. Air cooled along the river, the distant sound of a barge nested under the fan's rhythm. I wrote "Move Day 10" on the inside cover of my notebook and underlined "choose" in the sentence I'd been repeating all month. I choose when and where. The room behind me held its breath and then let it go as if the house agreed. There would be voices tomorrow and the next day, perhaps posts still simmering, and faces waiting to be read. But tonight the signature was enough, the wire was enough, the key in my pocket was enough. I turned off the radio and the porch light and let the frame hold. Pastor John's post appeared just after breakfast, a single sentence in plain type. "We spoke with Henry today. No photo, no hashtags, no sermon threaded beneath." The effect was immediate and visible the way a tide mark is visible on pilings. Comments that had been stacking themselves into a barricade suddenly lost interest in their own weight. The neighborhood page turned from prescriptions to pie recipes. 2 people sent private messages offering a ride to the market or help with boxes. I thanked them and wrote their names in my pocket notebook, not as debts, but as coordinates of steadiness. By mid-morning, I drove to the storage facility, a compound of concrete aisles and roll-up mouths numbered in industrial stencils. The clerk behind the counter wore a navy vest and had a pen that clicked exactly once per line. I slid 2 copies of my inventory across the desk, each box labeled, time-stamped, and described in enough detail to satisfy a customs agent. The facility tag numbers matched my sheet. We added a late holiday overflow carton without drama. I initialed, the clerk initialed, and a second copy went into a clear sleeve stamped "Received." On the way out, the fluorescent lights hummed. I wrote an email to Eric that contained only instructions. Pick up by appointment within 30 days. ID required. Fees after 30 days theirs to own. The send button made no sound, which is the sound I prefer. At Palmetto Trust, the branch manager greeted me by name without reaching for familiarity. She confirmed the no third-party inquiry flag and showed me a printout of a recent call from a blocked number that had asked, too smoothly, about my general balance position. The request died at the script line where it was supposed to die. "Any inquiry has to be in person with ID," she said, tapping the policy with one finger. "We'll alert you and your attorney if anyone tries another door." I logged "attempt blocked" in the notebook and slipped the bank's confirmation behind a brass clip in the ledger. Procedures are rails, trains stay on them because they are there. An email from Ben arrived after lunch, a neat bundle of photos and a note with the economy of good crews. The porch wore sanding dust like flour on a baker's apron. Balusters sat on sawhorses, numbered in pencil. Tape skirted the floor where finish would run smooth as rain. At the end, he mentioned a small plaque they hoped to install later. "Whitfield Porch. Restored 2025. I read the line twice. The ache it gave was the right kind, the kind you get when something you love is going to live without you, and that is, in fact, the point. On the curb, Mrs. Parker intercepted me with a brown paper sack that breathed peaches and butter. She didn't ask how I was. She squeezed my forearm and said, "You're steady," which is better than "you're strong," because it admits a man's knees can wobble while his line stays true. Across the street, 2 neighbors waved and offered to shoulder a box. I handed over a small one on purpose. Community is practice as much as feeling, and practice requires repetitions. The box was light, the thanks heavier. There was a voicemail from Eric in the afternoon, shorter than the weather, a little raw around the edges, as if he had driven the sentence over gravel. He asked for a real talk man-to-man. I saved the message and set the phone face down. In the notebook, I wrote a boundary I could read back to myself later. No calls. Written only via Lauren until conditions acknowledged. Disappointment is useful when it cools. It becomes information instead of fuel. The house settled its frame with a soft tick. Magnolia Bend. H. OA posted a correction that evening, the blandest kind of retreat. A clerical error regarding certain violation notices now rectified. No apology, only subtraction. Lauren forwarded a copy of the updated ledger showing the fine withdrawn. I printed it and clipped it to the HOA folder, another paper Joyce set where one had been missing. Files aren't walls, but they hold their shape like walls do. Day 10 on my clock, put a key to a new door in my hand. Low country oaks smelled like lemons and new paint, the way orderly places smell when they are waiting to be lived in. The corner unit opened to morning light that bled across laminate and onto a small balcony. I placed Martha's photo on the dresser first, then her fountain pen in a shallow tray, then the model skiff Eric and I had built back when glue was the most dangerous thing we handled together. The room calibrated around those three things as if they were studs in a hidden wall. I tuned the radio until the same soul station found me. The song that rolled out spoke to anybody holding on the long way. It sounded like it always had, and also like a new room being told what it would be. Saturday, I met Pastor John in the church courtyard, a square of shade and magnolia leaves that cupped the sound of our shoes. Instead of gossip, we designed a small thing that could outlast talk. A weekly woodworking mentorship in Martha's name where teenagers would learn to plane and square a board to hear the quiet that means the joint has taken. Tools teach character, he said. Character teaches tools, I answered. Both of us were right. That afternoon, I emailed Lauren to add language to the will, a portion for a work skills fund to buy planes and chisels and pay for sandpaper that will spend itself faithfully. Back at the new apartment, I made lists that felt like ashlar, each item squared to the next. Bank visit for safe deposit access, sign the medical proxy, confirm movers for the handful of furniture pieces that will follow me, review storage pickup note, draft conditions for any future meeting with Eric, no phones, no posts, counsel aware, a table with 4 legs and no ambushes. The light sank down the wall. I turned off the lamp and listened to the room hold silence without strain. The ledger got its nightly line, posts cooling, storage set, bank secure, porch under care, move complete. I closed the book. Relief didn't jump or shout. It settled like dust after work well done. There were no triumphs waiting in the hall, only consequences arranging themselves into furniture. The thing I had chosen, dignity at my own tempo, continued choosing me back in small increments. A door that locked and opened because I held the key, a porch being restored by people who understood why railings deserve names, a church willing to turn fury into instruction. I lay back and felt the frame of the bed support without complaint. Outside, a live oak breathed in the almost cool. Inside, I did what houses teach you to do after a storm. Count what's still standing, write it down, sleep. Pastor John suggested the bench beneath the live oak, the one that makes even summer air feel moderated by grace. I agreed to 30 minutes on church grounds with no phones, no photos, no extra bodies, and anything that mattered written afterward through Lauren. Guardrails make a meeting a tool instead of a fight. I arrived 5 minutes early, sat where the shade fell across my knees, and felt the bark-rough wind trace its way along the inside of my ribs. I was not eager. I was not punitive. I was the person who signed the deed and kept the key for 10 days, and I wanted the conversation to reflect that fact. Eric crossed the courtyard alone, slower than he walks when he is selling a plan. He sat at the far end of the bench and stared at his shoes long enough to quiet his own noise. When he spoke, the voice was stripped of the theater he uses with clients. I was scared of failing, he said. I needed a win, and I pressed. The post was wrong. He let the words stand without trying to sweep them up. I did not debate motives. I did not revisit the porch. I restated what exists. The house is sold. The funds are secure. Possession is mine for 30 days. Medical decisions name Pastor John and no one else, and any property or finance topic goes through Lauren in writing. Pastor John sat on a nearby low wall, hands folded, a witness whose job was not to referee, but to anchor the room in the open air. Conditions came next, not negotiations. I told him 6 months with no family content online. Delete the thread, no back channeling through the HOA or anyone adjacent to it. All logistics go by email to Lauren. Contact may resume in a supervised, time-boxed conversation only after the first 90 days of silence. No surprise visits to any residence of mine. Storage pickup by appointment before day 30, with ID or fees are his. Breach returns all contact to counsel only. Harassment triggers a cease and desist. Lines meet paper to become structure. That is how houses stand, and it is the only way this might stand too. I did not have a speech for him. Instead, I took a small cabinet scraper from my pocket, the kind you flex with your thumbs until the edge kisses wood. I set it on the bench between us. You can only use a scraper if you know how to listen for the pitch that means you are taking shavings, not dust. Repair begins at the edges where the hand wants to hurry. He looked at it and did not touch it. That was all right. Tools do not need to be understood in one sitting. When the half hour ended, I stood, thanked Pastor John for the shade, and walked to my truck without a backward glance. In the parking lot, I wrote the time and place in my pocket notebook, then drove home and turned the meeting into paper. My email to Lauren was a clean ledger. Date, bench under the live oak, 30 minutes, attendees, conditions A and B, and the boundary that all next steps run through her. I attached a one-page conditions for contact memo and asked her to countersign and send it to Eric for acknowledgement. At Palmetto Trust, I reviewed alerts and added Lauren as secondary notification on anything odd, so the bank would call both of us if someone went shopping for information with a smile. That afternoon, we moved from conversation toward structure that outlasts conversation. I confirmed the will and trust language with Lauren. A portion to fund a small work skills program in Martha's name. Tools cost money and paper makes money hold still long enough to become lumber and sandpaper and safe hands. In my apartment, I sketched a 4-week outline for Pastor John. Week 1, reading grain, planing straight, hearing the quiet when a joint takes. Week 2, squaring edges, clamping without bruising. Week 3, glue-ups, measuring diagonals, fixing a racked frame. Week 4, finishing, patience as a finish, respect as the clear coat that keeps hands honest. Boundaries need walls to hang on, so I built a corkboard above the small desk and pinned copies where my eyes would meet them. Bank policy printout, storage appointment sheet, the countersigned conditions for contact, Lauren's cease and desist template. I verified camera notifications and checked battery levels in a rhythm that felt more like maintenance than fear. The storage manifest got one last pass. Every box matched a line. I asked Lauren to send Eric a polite reminder of the pickup window. The inbox gave me silence, which is sometimes compliance and sometimes delay. Either way, the clock does the work. Nicole's apology arrived through Lauren, brief and typed without adjectives. She said she would refrain from contempt. I did not reply. Receipt was noted by counsel and filed. Silence is not punishment. It is a boundary that does not invite debate. When you plane a board, you do not argue with the grain. You adjust your angle until the tool stops tearing and starts singing. I spent the evening with shavings. Pastor John had texted that 2 teens signed up for Saturday, so I pulled 2 serviceable planes from a cabinet and lapped their soles until they tracked true on a sheet of wet and dry taped to glass. I honed irons to a small burr that caught skin and then let go. Tape labels read Martha's Bench in block letters. On the doormat, someone had left a small brass hinge with a note, "For the class." I held it to the light and smiled because hinges are partnerships by design. They are only themselves when both leaves behave. Before bed, I walked the new apartment like a foreman with a punch list. The radio found the station that knows my name from the years I listened on the porch. The bed learned my weight. On the corkboard, the paper looked like a frame, clean corners, no gaps, ready to hold weight when weather comes. I wrote a single line in the notebook: terms offered, tools handed, will amended draft in flight, boundaries posted, and underlined the word terms once. Relief came without reconciliation. That is a kind of peace older men recognize. Not the singing finish, not yet, but the first pass that tells you the board is flatter than it was at noon. I set the cabinet scraper on the desk where the morning light would hit it and went still. If a man is lucky, he learns the difference between hope and plan. Hope waits for the wood to change direction. Plan turns the work so the edge can follow the grain that is already there. Tomorrow I would oil a handle, answer Lauren's email, and pick up more sandpaper. The live oak outside kept talking to the wind. Inside, I let the room hold me the way a good bench holds a board, steady, square, ready for the next pass. Ben's email arrived before the kettle finished its complaint, a neat stack of photos and 3 sentences with the economy I've come to trust. The porch glowed under a new skin of finish, the rail catching morning the way a hymn catches breath. Balusters, each one numbered in pencil, had found their original spacing again. The end grain winked where they'd been kissed with sealant. A final image showed a small brass plate held up by a gloved hand. Whitfield Porch. Restored 2025. I read the caption twice and did not drive by. Boundaries keep both sides honest. Let the place belong to its future, and let me belong to mine. Saturday put me in the church basement kitchen with 2 teenagers and a pair of planes I'd lapped until they tracked true. We called it Martha's Bench because she believed work should feed people, even if all it feeds at first is patience. I said as little as possible and kept my hands where they could see them. We started with grain reading, how light moves across fibers, how cathedrals can mislead, how a board tells the truth if you tilt your head and stop trying to be right. When the first long shaving lifted like silk from a shoulder cut, the boy holding the plane looked up as if a note had rung through his teeth. Later, they signed their practice pieces on the end grain, initials small as a promise. Safety first, then alignment, then music. That order stays. Palmetto Trust remains boring in all the ways I require. The manager confirmed alerts, logged safe deposit access, and printed a sheet that showed no further attempts to make my balance speak. Procedures are scaffolds. You take them down once the wall sets, but not before. Lauren emailed the final will and trust draft the same afternoon. The fund is named for Martha without adjectives, just a name and a purpose and a line item for consumables that will spend themselves properly. Paper, cloth, abrasive, glue. Independent living notes are clean. I read every page and placed a sticky tab where my signature would land like a foot on the last rung. News from the neighborhood travels in smaller vessels now. Mrs. Parker left an envelope under the mat at Low Country Oaks with a note on her floral stationery. The rail gleams like a hymn. No commentary, no question mark. I propped it behind the radio knob. Another neighbor texted a photo from the sidewalk. No faces, just a morning angle across the steps and the banister. I saved it, then locked the phone. The past is not a pet. It does not need daily attention to survive. Eric's first verifiable step came the way it should. Through Lauren, not a feed. A voicemail with the sound of pots and industrial vent hoods in the background, followed by an email of his volunteer log at the church kitchen. Hours tallied, no hashtags. Receipt noted, she wrote. I asked her to reply with the same 2 words on my behalf. The condition clock keeps time even when nobody watches the second hand. Early evening brought the appointment we had agreed to on paper. Eric at my door alone, empty hands visible, the chain off but the rules on. No recording. 20 minutes, a table near the window, Pastor John on standby if needed. He stepped inside with the tuned-down energy of someone entering a hospital room, not a courtroom. He set the model skiff on the table with both palms supporting the hull the way men carry sleeping children. The seams were repaired, edges resanded, sheer fare again. He sat without reaching for words. The quiet held. I did not ask about money, deeds, posts, or intentions. I inspected the skiff like a shop teacher signing off a project. Small triangles of fresh paper had found the old glue lines, the deck had been eased to remove the bite of a bad pass, the mast step was square. Someone had learned to check diagonals instead of arguing with corners. The cabinet scraper from last week lay near the blotter, its edge newly burnished. I turned the skiff and found my own pencil marks from years ago ghosting the interior, measure twice, erase once, and felt approval rise without the need to reward. Better, I said. He nodded, eyes where they should be. Terms are there to hold a door, not to slam it. I said that if the 6-month clean window holds and service continues, we can walk the river trail one afternoon with Pastor John somewhere nearby. No phones, no photos, no negotiation along the path. He did not ask for more. He left the skiff and went the way he came, lighter by an ounce of pretending, heavier by a pound of work. After the door closed, I wrote the time and terms in my notebook and put the pencil back where it lives. The next morning, I signed the will and trust in Lauren's conference room. Witnesses initialed, the notary's stamp landed with its small, authoritative cough, and a copy went into the safe deposit box with the tidy gravity of a chisel wrapped in brown paper. Another copy settled into Lauren's file. A third came home to the corkboard until it can move to longer storage. We did not linger. Paper is not a destination. It is a road surface that doesn't fail under weight. Back at the apartment, I oiled the scraper handle and set it across the bench like a line break. The planes for class got labels with the kids' names penciled discreetly near the rear tote. On the corkboard, I added a card that reads, "Will signed, fund named." The radio found the station again without my help. A song lifted and settled and did not try to be more than it was. Ben's final email of the week included one last photo in raking light that made the rail look like calm water. He wrote that the plaque would be installed next Tuesday at noon. I replied with thanks and declined the invitation to attend. Some acknowledgments are better when witnessed by strangers who live there now. Mrs. Parker will see it and tell me without adjectives, and that will be enough. I ended the day, as I end most now. Lists short enough to finish, tools put away sharp enough to respect, papers aligned until the corner stack reads like a single sheet. On the desk, Martha's photo held the same look she wore when a job crossed from effort to craft. The cabinet scraper lay beside it, edge ready but patient. The repaired skiff took its place as if it had always been meant for this table. In the ledger, I wrote one line, porch restored, fund alive, terms holding, and closed the book with both hands. Enough without finale. The future does not applaud. It waits to be built. Coffee steam braided with the quiet of my new place, and the corkboard looked like a modest courthouse. Will signed, conditions for contact bank policy sheet, a short list on the pocket notebook pinned with a brass tack. The list was ordinary: pickup sandpaper, email, Lauren receipt of plaque photo, confirmed Saturday's lumber, but ordinary is the kind of victory that lasts. At 66, winning looks like sleep that doesn't flinch at 2 a.m., paper that adds up, work with a place to stand, neighbors who wave without a meeting. Dignity isn't a feeling I chase anymore. It's a process I keep. I took inventory of what I carry. Martha's pen rests in its groove, the black lacquer nicked where her thumbnail loved it thin. The cabinet scraper sits on the blotter with an edge I can trust. The repaired skiff holds the curve of a patient hand instead of the bite of a hurry. The radio finds the same soul station it always did, and the volume is low enough to hear would think. I keep one photo taken from the sidewalk, the porch in morning light, rail polished to a line that says someone listened. What I set down is as important: keys already surrendered, the habit of answering rumor with noise, the reflex to explain what doesn't need explaining. You can't carry a house, but you can carry the way you built it, square, level, and patient under pressure. Class ran in the church workshop, and 2 teenagers learned today that a shooting board tells on you. One boy muscled the plane and fought the grain until the mouth chattered like loose teeth. I tapped the heel, reset the fence, and waited for his breath to match the stroke. The other boy hesitated, then took a single pass so true it sounded like a tone fork laid against bone. We talked about how a tool magnifies intention. Control without care is damage. Care without control is drift. Mistakes sand out when you admit them early. After the plane finally sang, I showed them the porch plaque on my phone for 10 seconds, no speech, just a line of light on brass. "Sign your work," I said, and they pressed their initials into ingrain that will outlast their sneakers. I walked the public sidewalk in my old neighborhood and stopped a half block away. The house breathed like a thing that had found its next paragraph. A child's laugh slipped through the screen and bounced off the rail I know by hand. I didn't step on their grass, didn't lean for a better angle, didn't linger. Preservation means surrender with standards attached. You let go of possession and keep the conditions that make a place worth inheriting. I turned at the corner and let the boundary stand where boundaries do their best work, invisibly until someone tests them. Email stayed quiet. Lauren noted that Eric kept the online silence. Storage was picked up on time. Volunteer hours continued. The HOA ledger closed without ceremony. I replied with a single word I use more often now, received. Consequences replaced complaints in the calendar, and that, as far as weather goes, is what adulthood looks like. Rain that falls on schedule, roads that drain, no sirens. I took the river path at golden hour and let the light skim the water like a hand-checking finish. Pastor John called to ask what I wanted the kids to try next week. We kept it short. "Shooting board, then simple miters," I said. "Patience as a finish." He laughed, the kind that doesn't perform, and hung up. Conditional hope is the only kind worth the name. If the 6-month window holds and service continues, I can picture a bench talk on this path with Eric sometime downriver. No guarantees, just a chair kept open in a room with good light. Back home, I wrote a page to Martha I won't mail. I told her the fund bears her name without adjectives, that sandpaper and time are being purchased for children who might never have learned the sound a shaving makes when it's right. I told her the porch is stamped with a small brass plate, not to brand a victory but to say the work happened. I wrote that I didn't defend us with speeches. I defended us with signatures and habits. She always believed the long way is the honest one. The pen click closed and felt like a valve shutting on a clean line. There's a rule I learned too late to keep every bruise off the record, but not too late to teach. Never trade privacy for optics. Never sign speed. Never confuse attention with care. Backward, it explains tuition checks and overtime. And that wedding I couldn't afford. Generosity is a virtue only when joined to boundaries. Forward, it sets a metronome. Keep counsel, keep copies, keep your tempo when the room tries to loan you its panic. I did the small end-of-day closures that make tomorrow less fragile, backed up the drive, waxed the class plane so hands will meet glide instead of drag, marked 6 months on the calendar as a quiet window and let the squares mean what they say. Down on the street, Mrs. Parker waved up from the curb and I gave one nod back. No more was needed. Civility is a beam, not a banner. Night came the way good finish dries, slow even without fuss. Martha's photo, the scraper, and the skiff aligned themselves on the desk like a sentence with subject, verb, and object in their rightful order. The radio murmured its amen. The fan kept a hum steady as a chalk line. I wrote one last entry in the pocket notebook. Porch stands, bench open. Terms holding. Work tomorrow. Then I capped the pen and let the room hold its shape. A life doesn't end with noise. It keeps its outline because joinery was checked each day, because rails were oiled and hinges set true, because paper bore weight without tearing. If there is a message in what happened, it's ordinary as lumber and as exacting. Choose your signatures, keep your habits, and let your dignity be something you do. I turned off the light. The dark did not feel like loss. It felt like a shop closed for the night. Tools sharp, bench swept, project mid-sentence, ready for the next pass. In the quiet after every storm, what remains isn't the noise or the loss. It's the proof that integrity outlasts betrayal. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply rebuilding your peace. One boundary, one signature, one breath at a time. Life teaches that dignity isn't given, it's maintained. Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts below, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that remind us how strength can be quiet yet unbreakable.